businesses actually reopened, I'll be almost inclined to say it looks like things are almost as normal as it was before. So many cars on the road and stuff like that. Okay, what did I read today? Just after yesterday, with all that new proposed drone law changes here in Canada, I guess in the US there's some kind of update with that remote ID stuff. This one here says for immediate releases from the FAA. It says the US Department of Transportation's Federal Aviation Administration today announced the 8 companies that will assist the federal government in establishing requirements for future suppliers of remote identification. Remote ID will enable unmanned aircraft systems, commonly called drones, to provide identification and location information while operating in a nation's airspace. So doesn't this mean technically they went through with the remote ID stuff? Because I know people did all the commenting and stuff in the US, which is supposed to make them think, okay, are we doing the right thing or not? Should we scrap this? Doesn't this kind of confirm in some ways that, yep, we're doing this anyways? I guess the fascinating thing is, who exactly are these people or organizations that get to have their input, I guess you can say? And I would imagine for a lot of people it would actually raise their eyebrows. It says here, the FAA selected the following companies to develop technology requirements for future remote ID UAS services suppliers: Airbus, AirMap, Amazon, Intel, OneSky, Skyward, T-Mobile, and Wing. These companies were selected through a request of information process in December 2018. Wow, like if you think about this, there is actually no drone manufacturers, for example, having like some kind of input in this. It's basically huge, large commercial businesses, like say an Amazon, and Wing is technically Google. Now they do say the process in choosing was based on who requested, like I guess to have information based on this form in 2018. So technically, according to this, I guess no drone manufacturers submitted themselves for this. That's just kind of interesting to think about, isn't it? I know the popular perspective with a lot of people in terms of trying to explain why there's such sensational stories, creating over-the-top drone regulations when there's been no deaths and so forth, is the theory on how commercial companies are basically trying to take over, for example, like the airspace, because they want to do commercial stuff with it, drone deliveries and all that, so they want to kick out every single recreational flyer. Whereas I guess seeing this list, I don't think it's gonna make that perspective any lighter. I think it's just people will be, I guess, even more mad for those who believe that. It makes me think like here in Canada, which I mentioned before, for all these all of a sudden restrictions on like recreational flyers and coming out with laws which don't seem to focus on safety at all. It's just restricting people to, hey, we're gonna discourage you from flying, like period. Where were all the recreational flyers that you consulted with, for example? Or was it just big businesses and commercial companies? Because like here, I would say that's what it seems like actually. It's all huge businesses and all that too. I guess you could argue that these are technology providers, so to speak. Like for example, like Intel, they make things like processors and all that. So you'd want basically those types of people in these types of discussions. But still, yeah, not one drone manufacturer stuff like that. It's kind of weird that they all just decide, oh no, like we don't want any part of this, or they can't have any part of it for whatever reason. Like, to me, that's a little weird, especially during when they had that remote ID. You had certain companies basically saying, give your input and stuff like that, yet they have, I guess, the power and resources to actually get in there, make their voice heard and all that, and that way, yet they're not there, so that's weird. One thought I had, which I still think it's true, is because flying things like a drone, it's way too niche and small at the moment, where I guess a lot of people, they just, again, don't have like the power, so to speak, or the numbers to get their voice heard and influence some kind of positive change that's reasonable and focused on safety. That's why in many ways, like with that recent debacle here in Canada about the guns being banned and people saying like that law does nothing to do with safety, it's just kind of interesting to see how they are handling it. Because even though, like I said, I don't use a gun, it's just kind of disturbing actually to see that they passed like a law and stuff like that that had no, I guess, democratic process. So it's kind of interesting seeing like organizations, I guess, like this one. It says, we're going to court, charter challenge. The CCFR, as a public relations and education branch of the Canadian firearms community, has not typically pursued litigation as a tool of changing legislation or steering public policy. As a result of this unprecedented attack on the freedom and liberty of Canadian sports shooters and hunters, that's changing. So they're apparently taking this to court. It says something here like, Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom provides that, quote, everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. From what I gather, they said themselves this is a long shot as well, because they said something about when you put it in front of a judge, obviously it's their opinion afterwards, and they said most, I guess, judges aren't in favor of like things like guns like that, from what I gather anyways. But it's just kind of interesting to see them actually try and how it actually turns out. I would imagine there definitely are way more people who own things like a firearm in Canada than say a drone. So you can actually kind of see, like, even with things like their petitions and stuff they created, like official ones, they have like what, over 100,000 signatures and stuff like that on multiple, I guess, petitions, and they're basically trying to get this change. And again, it's just really fascinating to see how they do it. In saying that, I often heard the opinion for things like drone restrictions. A lot of people say, well, people like, I don't know, whoever's coming up with those policies are basically killing the youth and their interest in this tech to basically grow it in the future. So it's kind of actually interesting reading this. It has nothing to do with like coronavirus or whatever, but apparently they're gonna shoot like what? A movie like in space? Like here what it says, NASA is excited to work with Tom Cruise on a film aboard the space station. That's one way to ensure physical distancing, huh? But then this is the interesting phrase here. It says, we need popular media to inspire a new generation of engineers and scientists to make NASA's ambition plans a reality. Think about that. They recognize the importance of, I guess, like a younger generation getting excited about their tech and industry in order to grow it. So imagine for things like the drones where they over-exaggerate the danger, like, oh no, this, what, 250-gram drone is gonna go flying like crazy all of a sudden from the backyard of your house, take down 1 million airplanes, kill people. So because of that, we have to enforce all these crazy rules. Like, to me, that's a little nuts. I've said this plenty of times though, in this type of similar sentiment here, because they said they need popular media to inspire a new generation. I think it's the same thing with things like drones, for example. It's things like the arts and entertainment that the average person can actually relate to in many ways. I think it's just as important in terms of making people not afraid of this and encouraging more people to use it, like in general, obviously in a safe way. How do people in the US feel about this, with this FAA thing and the remote ID, knowing this now? Do people give up? Like they say, okay, that's it, it's over, just counting down the days until they can't fly the thing anymore, or it'll cost like a fortune and so forth? Or are they still, I guess, in a sense, fighting it?
There's kids underneath.
Let's see.
Come on, guys. Exercise your kids. What is what a thick one. Thick don't.
Well, I'm just trying to get.
No, there they are, yeah.
I'm not scaring her. I'm just moving close so that there we go. Now, soon I think.
Oh, that's a lot.
Your babies are just lovely.
Is the duck making that sound?
Can you see them there, Brad?
I can see all of them.
Okay. You come over here.
I've seen them quite a few times already.
That's what we want them now. They were all, and I think they'll all jump into the water.
Hey, come back, Tom.
She's like, come on in, come on in.
I can't believe they were all under her. There were so many of them.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, it's a parade.
There they go.
There we go. Yeah, the flowers rejoined.
All right. See you guys later.